Hi, I'm Anton Krieger, host of All Things Green. Coming up on this week's show is Zainab Pixler, who joins us from the world of sustainable food systems. This episode of ATG is brought to you by NextGen Clean Energy Solutions, your sustainable easy button from concept to completion. Welcome to All Things Green. I'm Anton, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. Zainab Pixler is Cleveland's first ever program director for the local food systems in the city's Department of Public Health. Zainab, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Zainab, we've talked a lot about sustainable food on All Things Green. I'm curious, what got you into sustainable food systems?
Yeah, so my intro to food systems actually started when I was in high school. I was working in food service, and then when I got to college, I had the opportunity to take some courses about sustainable food systems. So I originally had a supply chain major and then added a food studies minor because my interest in food systems really grew from there.
What did you do in high school that inspired you to go to college for food systems?
I actually didn't know I wanted to be in food systems when I first got to college. I thought I wanted to be a big chief marketing officer for some big corporation.
Wow.
And then I had to meet a requirement in college, so that propelled me into the food studies courses that the college had to offer. And that's when I decided that I wanted to dedicate my career to food systems.
That's really cool. So give me the breakdown from college all the way to Cleveland's very first sustainable food director.
Local food systems
Local
strategies,
food systems
yeah.
director. Give me the breakdown. What happened in college and then from there on?
Yeah, so I had another requirement to fill in college of having internships. So I had a couple of summer internships working for these large international corporations that were food systems related, but were really working within a conventional food system. So and through my college career, I really learned about sustainable food systems. So after those internships and after realizing that profit-oriented organizations were not for me, I decided to search for careers in mission-oriented organizations, which brought me to Cleveland. I started working at the Greater Cleveland Food Bank, running their retail donation program. So all of the grocery stores in the 6 counties that the food bank serves,
Wow.
I managed all of the donations from all of those
That's phenomenal.
grocery stores. It was a really incredible experience. After a couple of years, I decided to leave for an opportunity at a national nonprofit called the Center for Good Food Purchasing, where I was a data analyst. And there I really learned about institutional food procurement. So all the school districts, departments of corrections, hospital systems that we worked with to help them shift their food purchasing to more local, sustainable, humane food sources. And now I have the opportunity to work here for the city of Cleveland, in the city that I call home, working on food policy work.
That's amazing. So I'm hearing you talk about a little bit more of like a for-profit, maybe internship type of deal. You worked in nonprofit, and now you're working in governmental.
Yes.
Is there any other players in this ecosystem of food?
Absolutely. There are grassroots organizations that are really working to organize their communities around food systems work. So that's everything from community gardens to food cooperatives, and really getting to see those organizations grow alongside these other nonprofit food systems organizations as well.
That's really interesting. And so working during that national nonprofit that you were talking about as the senior data analyst, what kind of things did you learn during the pandemic about food? Like how can people be fed when there's national supply chain issues? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So there were a lot of challenges our institutions faced for many different reasons when the pandemic first started in 2020. They were having lots of issues sourcing food, getting their orders filled, because we rely on this international food supply chain that a lot of people heard about when the pandemic first started. and that sort of reverberated in years following. But what we saw with particularly our school districts, those that had farm-to-school managers or farm-to-school positions within their schools were able to leverage the relationships with local farmers and local food businesses that they'd built over the years and really procure food to be able to continue to feed their students throughout the early stages of the pandemic. So really relying on those strong relationships with local growers, with local food businesses to be able to continue doing things in a much different way than they were doing things, but still feeding people.
Yeah, I think that's so profound. I used to work in an economic development job, and throughout the pandemic, it seemed that when there was local connections, whether it was like small businesses to small farmers or even just residents who were really bought into the idea of shopping locally, it seems like those were the communities that thrived when shit hit the fan. Like people were able to come together and put dollars where money needed to be spent to keep communities afloat, to build that resiliency.
Absolutely. And there was a greater shift and more recognition and more awareness around where our food was coming from. It took something like a pandemic for people to start asking those questions and to start realizing that, the system that we've been relying on for so long is not working. And for many people, they started to explore those relationships with their local farmers after the pandemic because they realized that sometimes when you go to the grocery store, it's food that's traveling, 1,500 plus miles to get to your plate. So
That's a long way.
It is a long way, and it has a great environmental impact.
So 1,500 miles, is that like from Cleveland to like the southwest or something? Is that like all the way in California or?
Yeah, California is a big agricultural production center for the United States and for the world, really. And then you have, of course, the Midwest really producing some commodity crops, so corn, soy, big beef producing states. So food travels from all over the place. But yeah, it travels a long way.
Zainab, before we were filming today, we were talking a little bit in the green room and we were talking about food scarcity, which I found out was really not the most up-to-date term. You use the word food apartheid, and I'm curious, what is the difference between food scarcity and food apartheid, and why is food apartheid more representative of what's going on in hungry communities?
Absolutely. Food apartheid is a term coined by Karen Washington, who's a farmer and advocate out of New York, and it's meant to replace terms like food scarcity or food desert, which folks might be more familiar with, because those terms imply a lack of life, and it also implies a natural occurring phenomenon, whereas food apartheid takes into account the societal forces like redlining and structural racism that have intentionally created these areas of low food access.
Wow, yeah, that's great for the viewers to know. And how does your position now at the City of Cleveland fight food apartheid? What are some of your favorite programs? Give me an overview about that.
Absolutely. So in my role, I have the opportunity to support a lot of really great programming happening across the city. So whether that's urban farms like Riddall Green Partnership, Village Family Farms, Rev Love Farms, Ohio City Farm.
Yeah.
I also have the opportunity to spread the word and support farmers markets. There are plenty of farmers markets throughout the city. And alongside promoting programming and supporting programming, I also have the opportunity to change policy. So what I'd really like to do for the City of Cleveland is conduct a food policy audit so that we can take a look at all of the policies that exist within the city that either hinder or support food sovereignty, and then conduct this audit and really hone in on what policies are needed to better support food systems work throughout the city.
That's really interesting. If you were able to wave your magic wand and say, I want this one policy to be different from the way it is now, which one policy would you choose?
It's a very timely question where the city is actually in the process of updating its zoning codes in a few neighborhoods in the city of Cleveland to a form-based code. So right now there's the opportunity to advocate for more supportive policies around urban agriculture in our zoning code. So I've been reaching out to folks to really be able to figure out what the priorities are, what we want our zoning code to look like in these regions that are adopting the form-based code, and to be able to implement some more supportive policies.
And what kind of changes would come out of the zoning code? Because when people think of zoning, they think of like construction, they think of building new buildings. How does that impact food?
Yeah, so zoning codes are actually really impactful to urban agriculture, particularly, because it dictates what you can and can't do with the land that you own or that you're leasing. So with urban agriculture, there's potentially all these restrictions around when you can operate on your farm, whether you have a farm stand or not, how often you can sell produce from your farm or process goods from the things that you're growing on your land. So with the form-based code, there's currently restrictions around what times you can operate your farm on, how many days a year you can sell produce from your farm, things like that that really aren't supportive of operational urban farm.
No kidding.
So we're really looking to update those. And Cleveland's current zoning code before form-based code is actually pretty supportive of urban agriculture. And we have an urban agriculture overlay district, which means that urban agriculture is supported throughout all of the districts currently. But with this new form-based code, we want to make sure that all of the great advocacy work that went into developing Cleveland's current zoning code gets carried over into the form-based code as well.
That is like really interesting. And you're one of these people at the table that's advocating for new zoning.
Yes.
Is there any other positions around the state, around other major cities in the U.S. that have your position?
Yeah, so there's actually quite a few of us across the country, which is really, really exciting. We live in many different parts of government. So there's local positions, like mine's within the Department of Public Health within the city. There's planners across this, within Ohio, there's folks in planning departments that are working on food systems work. There's folks at county level working on food systems. And then there's also someone at the Ohio Department of Health that's tasked with food systems development. And in other cities, you could have someone working within the Office of Sustainability. Some cities have their own Office of Food Equity or Office of Food Policy, which is really exciting and something that I definitely dream of for Cleveland one day. So it really looks different depending on where you are, but it's a growing role.
Yeah. Speaking of growing, I'm curious about the farmers on the ground in Cleveland. You procure relationships between Cleveland Municipal School District and a lot of these local farmers. What about co-ops? Co-ops is something that I've heard about from other guests. I've heard maybe even a little bit like a buzzword. Like, what is co-op's role in the city of Cleveland?
Yeah, so there is actually quite a few different food systems related cooperatives in Cleveland. One comes to mind, Rust Belt Riders. They're a worker owned cooperative.
We've had some Rust Belt Rider guests.
Yeah,
That's really cool.
They're fantastic. They do. I'm a customer of theirs. They do a wonderful job.
Wait, what do you buy from them?
I compost through them.
You compost?
So I give them my food scraps, yes, and
Okay,
then they
gotcha.
compost it and turn it into their wonderful compost soil. So
Amazing.
Yeah. And there's also some initiatives to develop grocery cooperatives. So there's the Central Kinsman Wellness Collective as well as Little Africa Food Collaborative that are both working on organizing their communities around gathering buy-in for grocery cooperatives and then eventually running brick and mortar stores that are owned and operated by community members.
That's really cool. And what kind of roadblocks do you see these co-ops facing? What kind of roadblocks do you yourself face when you're up against the whole food system? I mean, and what successes have you also won over in your 7 months at the City of Cleveland?
So successes is tough because it's been such a short amount of time. I've
Yeah.
definitely really dedicated this time to relationship building, which is a success in itself, really
Yeah.
bringing people together and introducing myself and really understanding what folks' priorities are in the community. As far as roadblocks, there's There's a ton,
Yeah.
depending on which part of the food system that you're speaking to or referring to.
Yeah.
But, generally with food systems, food is really expensive. It can be really expensive for folks, and folks have sometimes have the hard task of deciding whether to pay their rent or buy groceries. And so when you talk about food systems and sustainable food systems, a lot of folks think, or organic food and how that's, more expensive by the price tag than conventional food. And so a lot of people get turned off by that or by that conversation, or, don't even see it as a possibility of supporting sustainable or local food systems. And it's my job to really share information with folks about there's many different ways to interact with your food system, whether it's growing your own food, talking to a local farmer, recycling your food scraps and composting. There's lots of different ways to get engaged with your food system. It could be even reading your food labels and figuring out who's manufacturing the food that you're consuming. So there's really lots of ways to get involved, and I think a lot of folks can be sometimes turned off by the conversation, but it's my job in my personal and professional life to be able to engage with folks on food systems at every level.
Yeah, because it's so easy to get turned off when activists are kind of giving this all or nothing mentality. Like sometimes it feels like the green guilt, we're not doing enough if we're not doing A, B, C, D, E. I've advocated for growing my own food on the podcast, but I can't grow every single thing that so there's always going to be that other thing you can do, but getting started with just recycling your food scraps or checking out your food labels is a great way to get in touch with where your food's coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. And do what you can do. I don't expect everybody to be able to do it all. And I think it's important that we hold our municipalities, like local and state and federal governments, accountable for the policies that they're enacting to better support sustainable and local food systems, and then also holding corporations accountable too, because there's things that we can do in our everyday life to support sustainability and local economies, but we really have to look at policies and large corporations that have even greater impact than any one of us could have.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about holding corporate food accountable? What does that look like? What's a policy that the city of Cleveland or the state of Ohio or the United States would say, this is going to help people be less hungry?
So there's a federal bill called the Farm Bill that dictates all of federal food policy.
Wow, okay.
And that can really be leveraged to better support programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, or food stamps as most people refer to it as. It also supports farmers in growing the food. So I've, in conversations with my friends and even for myself, I didn't realize that the federal government subsidizes a lot of food production or agricultural production.
Okay.
And so that, in turn, makes food artificially inexpensive. So when you have food like conventional produce that wasn't produced organically, it's artificially less expensive than something like organic produce when you take into account all of the health impacts, all of the environmental impacts that conventional produce or conventional meat has. It actually increases the cost of the food when you take into account all of these external factors. So with things like that, it's just a matter of really engaging folks on understanding that a lot of these policies are impacting your day-to-day. And it's really important for policies to support practices that are helping, not harming the environment and people and animals.
Yeah, so the federal government could pass, if they would like, a bill that could effectively make organic food cheaper by subsidizing those farmers that grow the organic produce. Is that right?
They could, if only it were as easy as that. But yes, yeah, they could.
Well, that's really interesting. And going way back down to the local level, I'm really curious, Zainab, how can people get plugged in? Anybody who's interested, anybody who this episode has speak to, how can people get plugged in on their own local level and kind of get their hands dirty? Maybe literally,
Maybe literally.
maybe metaphorically. Do you mind giving us a few examples?
Sure. So you can support your local food organizations, different nonprofits in the area that are working on food systems work. There are organizations such as the Hunger Network and the Greater Cleveland Food Bank, of course, that are doing anti-hunger work. You could also grow your own food, either on your own property or at a community garden near you. You could be a patron of your local farmers market. There are plenty of farmers markets throughout the city that operate sometimes year-round. So just going to your local farmers market, talking to local farmers about the food that they're growing, engaging with food that way. And then you could also talk to your neighbors about food systems and talk to your family members about food systems. And if you're interested in food policy, joining a local food policy coalition and really activating and engaging in policy that way.
There's a lot of ways to get involved.
Lots of ways. And I don't think I named them all even. You could compost either on your own property or through an organization as well.
Zainab, thank you so much for our conversation today and talking all things green with me. I'm really looking forward to having you on again in the future. I would love to hear more about your successes at the City of Cleveland and to learn even more about what we can do to solve hunger in our city.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
I'm going to let our viewers know how they can stay in touch with us, and thank you again. If you'd like to stay connected with the show, be sure to follow us on TikTok at ATG Show. And if you'd like to rewatch full episodes, check out our YouTube channel, All Things Green Show. You can find all of our sources from today's episode in our show notes. Thank you so much for being a part of the global sustainability movement. Zainab.